Welcome everybody. My name is Samuel Horvat, and together with Virginia Smith, Aurelien Bella, Dan Alistar, and Peter Starik, we are the organizers of the FLOB seminar. The FLOB seminar stands for Federated Learning One Word Seminar that aims to provide a global online forum for the dissemination of the latest scientific research, which includes all aspects of federated learning, including distributed optimization, learning algorithms, privacy, cryptography, personalization, communication compression, systems, hardware. And today it's my great pleasure to introduce you our speaker, Praneeth Karimireddy. So Praneeth recently finished just 2 days ago his PhD at EPFL, and he's advised by Professor Martin Yagi. In his research, he's interested in developing intelligence infrastructures for collaborative learning, and his research has been awarded with Dimitris Khorefas Foundation Prize, and more recently by a Best Paper Award at Federated Learning Workshop at ICML this year. And now he will be joining as a postdoc my Jordan group at UC Berkeley, supported by an SNSF fellowship. And today he's going to talk about practical federated learning. So thanks, Praneeth, for accepting to give a talk, and stage yours.
Thank you so much, Samuel. So today I want to talk about my challenges with designing trying to develop federated learning algorithms and the approach I ended up taking. So the main challenge we as theoreticians face, I think, when we're trying to design algorithms for deep learning is that we are just starting to understand how they even work. Right? Our theory is way behind understanding of what is really going on in deep learning optimization. So if you don't really understand even the standard, simple, centralized setting, trying to design algorithms from scratch for the federated learning is a bit hard, at least if you're a theoretician. So here, the approach we take is, okay, we don't really,
can I interrupt you just for a second?
Sure, of course.
So I don't see your camera. Is this just by accident or on purpose? The camera is off.
Oh, is the video off?
The video is off. Your video is off. We can see the slides. We don't see you.
Oh.
And of course, if you don't want us to see you, then that's fine. But if it's by accident, I wanted to tell you.
Oh yeah, this is an accident. Okay, let me try fix this.
Sorry for the interruption, but we'd like to see you if you allow us.
No, of course. Wait, maybe I'll just stop my screen and then try again.
Sure.
Is it visible now?
Now it works. We can see.
Okay, perfect. That's so weird. Okay. This one of
we can see who defended who's moving to the US. Great.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so the key challenge which I will try address in this talk is instead of trying to design algorithms from scratch, suppose someone gave us an algorithm which already works in the centralized setting, say Adam, or one of the fancier versions of Adam, or just SGD with momentum. Now, suppose someone just gave me this algorithm, how do I adapt it to the federated setting in a principled manner? So this is going to be our goal in this talk. And so there'll be, just to give an outline, there's 3 parts. First, I'll give we'll discuss about the algorithm itself, like how we come up with a framework to do this adaptation, which we call MIME. And then we'll dig into some theory. So in this section, in this talk, I'll just focus on momentum, like some theory about why momentum can work, helps in deep learning, and how to translate this theory from the standard centralized deep learning into the federated learning setting. And finally, if you have some time, this is an optional section, we'll see how to take these insights we gained about how momentum and adaptivity works and apply them in a new Bicentennial robustness setting, but let's see if we'll get there. Okay, so quickly, I would just want to go over the federated learning setting. I know all of you have seen this every single talk, so I'll go blow through this quickly. So there is a server who has a model, and this we want to train a single server model. There's a bunch of clients. You should think of them as mobile phones for this talk. And there's a lot of them. So there's a lot of clients. They have some data, which and some compute. And we want to train or do all the training locally on the clients. So data doesn't leave the clients. Federated learning proceeds in rounds. So in each round, the server selects some clients. It sends them a copy of the model. Then the clients do some computation, update their model, then send it back. The server aggregates it and updates the model. And this repeats again and again. So in this talk, I want to actually focus on what is called the cross-device federated learning setting. So this has some slightly special characteristics. So the first one is there's a very high overhead per round. This is probably true in many others in many other settings as well, but here it's especially important. It's really the overhead which kills us more than just the time spent communicating. So there's also a potentially huge and even infinite number of clients. So you think of training over all Android phones in the world. So this means that we will probably only see the clients once during the entire training process. Like we'll see an Android phone once and it may never again appear in our training process. And each client in this setting has a small amount of heterogeneous data. So, so these are the characteristics of the cross-device federated learning setting, and we formalize it as follows. Yeah. So, so X is the model parameter. So this, we want to minimize our loss with respect to over this model parameters, and our loss has an expectation over possibly infinite clients. I represents the client. So Fi is the client loss function. And this loss function is over a finite number of small data points. So Ni is small, and D is distribution over potentially infinite clients. So I want to, before this, I want to contrast this with the cross silo setting. So in the cross silo setting, which is on the right, there is a small number of clients. So N is small. So we sum over the number of clients. But the amount of data is, so each client potentially has a very large amount of data. So, so the data, there's an expectation over the data. In the contrast, cross-device, there's a sum over the data, but potentially infinite number of clients. And just to, to relate it with more classical optimization setting, the cross silo setting, because it's a finite sum over a finite number of clients, we can use tricks like variance reduction, like scaffold, and so on. Whereas the cross-device setting is more closer to the stochastic optimization setting because they're potentially infinite clients. And here, algorithms like SGD, Adam, Spider, and these are the ones which rule. And because there are potentially infinite clients, we need some assumption on the similarity. So in particular, so because imagine that there is some really weird client out there. Because there are infinite number of them, we never really see this particular client. But this during training, but then but then this can have an outsized impact on our loss function f. So if you want to minimize this objective, we need some notions of similarity. And here we just pick the simplest one, which is gradient dissimilarity. So I'll also use the notion of Hessian similarity, which is just the difference between the Hessians of the functions. So if our functions Fi are smooth, note that this is trivially satisfied by delta equals L, but potentially it is much smaller. I'll come to why this is later in the talk, why we need that part. Okay, so and in this talk, I'll be even more, I'll make it even simpler. So we just set Ni equals 1. So this is, so we assume that we can compute full local gradients over for any client. So our objective is just this, and I represents the client. And in each round, we sample just one client. So this is just to simplify the talk. Most of the ideas are already interesting in this setting. So let's look at this. Okay, enough setup. Let's dive into the first part, which is trying to come up with some algorithms. So again, throughout, I'll be assuming that we want to, so remember that we want to adapt centralized algorithms to the federated learning setup. I'll be using momentum as a motivating example to explain the concepts in the talk. But this also, all of these concepts also work with Adam or some other algorithm. Okay, but let's stick with momentum for now. So how would we use momentum? Probably the simplest algorithm to solve this would be what I'm calling server-only momentum here. So you sample a client I in the round, just compute the gradient fi at x. Don't do any local steps. Combine this with your momentum parameter and update your server parameter. So you just have your gradient, combine it with momentum, get your update, and use that to update the server parameter, and then also update the momentum parameter. So here the momentum is simply a running. It's basically an exponential moving average over the gradients. I know I wrote it in a weird way over here, but there's a reason why this will be useful later in the talk. But this way of writing SGD with momentum is exactly equivalent to the more traditional notions which most people are probably familiar with. Okay, so the nice thing about this is that convergence is guaranteed because it is basically the SGD with momentum, the centralized algorithm. But of course, we're just doing one local update per round, so it communicates a lot. So how would we use federated averaging with momentum? This has already been studied. So instead of running just one SGD step, instead of just computing one gradient, first run k SGD steps on a client. So I remains fixed. Keep updating yi k times starting from yi equals x. Then use the difference of x minus yi as a pseudo gradient. So the net distance your client has moved, just use that as a pseudo gradient and plug it into the momentum update as before. Right. So this is using, so this is nice because we're doing k updates. So we are doing more work per round. So but then this has some problems. It has what is called client drift. Doing those k updates incurs this what we call client drift. The momentum helps. Actually, people have found that momentum actually helps a lot in this setting. I'll do a quick recap of just for people who are not familiar with this concept of why federated averaging experiences client drift. So for simplicity, suppose there's just two clients, F1 and F2. So we want to so client one has this loss function, client two has that loss function, and we want to go to the optimum, which is at the center here. Suppose we start at this optimum and just run the federated averaging algorithm. So client one would update there, client two would update there. And then when we average the two, we move away from the true optimum towards this. So the point we move towards is actually closer to the average of the optima instead of the optimum of the average function. And these two are different. And so the algorithm is unstable. So a more intuitive way of stating this is that when we do more than one local step on any single client, we end up overfitting a lot to that client. And so the parameters we end up learning are much more useful for that client than for the global loss function. So this is what we call client drift. People have found experimentally this paper, for example, that using momentum actually helps a lot. So alpha is some measure of the amount of non-IDness. As we move to the right, it's more non-ID. So in blue is just without momentum beta equals 0, and here is beta 0.9, I think. So the difference between these two things actually between the blue and the red is quite large when you have a lot of non-ID. So momentum helps, and momentum helps a lot when there is non-ID data. So how do we use this? So this is, how do we use this intuition or experimental evidence people have observed? So, okay, momentum, people have observed that momentum helps, then let's use a lot more of it. So instead of just using it at the server level, we'll use it at every client update. So every client update uses a momentum step. So observation 2, momentum helps more for the non-ID setting. So, and this is sort of intuitive because as we saw before, momentum was an exponentially moving average of the gradients. So it must be mixing the gradients from all the different clients. And so it sort of, at least intuitively, prevents overfitting to any single client. So so this means that the most important part, the reason why momentum is useful is because it has information from a whole bunch of clients. And so what we do is we keep it fixed during the entire client updates and only update it at the server. So the intuition behind this, just to repeat, is that once you start, so momentum is supposed to have information about all the other clients. So once you already have a client sampled, you're not really getting any new information. So updating it locally doesn't really help. So just keep it fixed throughout the client updates. So I went through this a bit quickly. If any of you have any questions at some point, let me know, or just type in the chat, and I'll try to clarify. Okay, so hopefully this is just to explain again and what is going on. So x1 star is the optimum of client 1, x2 star is the optimum of client 2, x star is the global optimum. So if you do 3 steps of Fed average, client 1 will move there, client 2 will move there. And if you're using the Fed average momentum, that would just be the average update. So the average update is in this direction. So the red arrow represents the momentum. And so when you try add this momentum, you just move faster in this direction. In contrast, what MIME tries to do is apply the momentum every single step. So we keep it fixed. So we compute the momentum at the server level, and then we keep it fixed throughout all the updates. So at least in this pictorially, it's sort of clear that we are much more closer to the true average, true optimum, and momentum is guiding us in the right direction. So this is the high level intuition for the algorithm. Is it clear so far?
Yeah, I think that's quite clear. There are
Perfect.
no questions. And maybe I have just one quick question. It's more like,
sure.
I guess there is like just one typo. In the previous slide where you introduced, yeah, maybe one more back. You're using like eta for both like local and global step size. I guess it's a typo, or it's actually.
So there is no global step size here actually. So okay. So this is the.
So if you go more back, actually, maybe I probably yeah. So it's just this slide.
Yes, sorry. Yeah. So this is a typo. Here it should just be.
Just there.
So
just
yeah,
one, right?
This is just one, right? But yes, this is the server step size, and that's the client step size. And most of the places where we see eta is actually, or other than that place, it always refers to the client step size. Yeah, thanks for the catch. Okay, so what were the principles we saw?
Yeah, sorry, there's one other question by Constance
perfect.
in the chat. I'll try to unmute him.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So do you understand this thread that we just communicate the momentum along with the vector xt?
Exactly. Yes. So the client needs to be the clients need information of both the XT and this momentum parameter now to compute this update.
That's clear. Thank you.
That's good. Okay. So what? Just to repeat again, there was two principles we actually used. So there was some optimizer state. Here, the optimizer state was the momentum. And we kept it, we applied this momentum during every step of the client update. And second, this optimizer state was only updated at the server and it was kept fixed during the client updates. So these are the two principles we'll use to generalize this algorithm we saw to arbitrary algorithms. But so when I want to generalize this to an arbitrary algorithm, I'll make some assumptions about what the algorithm, the base optimizer, the centralized base optimizer is doing. So this is a very functional programming way of looking at what an optimizer is doing. So suppose, so we say that we can split any optimizer algorithm, base optimizer algorithm, which is denoted by B, into two parts. One is the update parameter update step, and a second and the state update step. So the parameter update step takes the gradient as the input and some state S and uses this to compute some update and updates the parameters using this. And then there's a state updater which takes the gradient and the previous state and then computes the new state. So just to work out how this would look like for the momentum. In momentum, there's only one state. It's the momentum vector. So like, just by looking at these equations, it's quite clear that the update step for the momentum looks like this. It takes a gradient as an input and the state, which is just the momentum, and then uses this as to compute the update. And then there's a state update step, so this is the momentum update step. And by comparing it with what we said before here, it's clear that this function would look like this. So this is just a functional breakdown. This is just a functional breakdown of what an optimizer is doing. So I think there's a question about is there a typo on slide 21? Oh, yeah, sorry. So no, this is not a typo. So the question was, is there a typo on slide 21? Why do I update using only I? Because this is the information I have sampled at this round. So in this round, only I is sampled. So I will use the gradient at this round to compute the update. But the important thing here is that this gradient is computed at X at the server parameters, not at YI. So this has no chance to overfit. It's computed at the server level. Okay. This is just to think about how these U and V look. So if you have more complicated algorithms, like say Adam, so in Adam there's actually two states, the first moment and the second moment, and then the update step will be some complicated function of the gradient, the first moment and the second moment. And similarly, the state update would update both the first moment and the second moment. So then if we have such a function updater, then so what we will do is we will repeatedly apply this update step using the client, the local gradient, but the fixed state S. So we'll keep the fixed state and we'll keep applying this K times. And then only at the server level, we will use this to update this, we'll update the state. So this is just a way of adapting so given any U comma V, which works in the decentralized, which works in the deep learning setting, say Adam or RMSprop or any of these fancy algorithms, they can all be broken down into U comma V sort of steps. And then we just repeatedly apply U for K times and apply V only at the server level. So this is the high level framework of mine. So I'll just to quickly look at the experiment. So this is the extended MNIST data set, and it's a simple 2 hidden layer deep learning, deep network with 10 local epochs for each of the client. So we only sampled 20 clients out of the 3,400 per round. So in say 500 rounds, we have only seen 1,000 clients, and so we don't even make a full pass over all the clients. The momentum is tuned for each of these over these methods. So I haven't really talked about what MIME and MIME-Lite is, but in the setting we talked about here, which is one client sample per round and a full local client gradients, they're actually identical. They perform much better than federated average or scaffold or FedProx. And yeah, so experimentally, it does seem to work quite well. And here, we had some intuition that it is actually better to keep the momentum fixed and not update it locally. So we just test this experimentally. So what happens if you do update the momentum locally? If you allow the client to also update the momentum. So that's this pink curve here, and it's actually worse. So it has much higher variance and it is slower. So this seems to confirm the intuition that it is actually better to keep the momentum fixed. Finally, I also want to look at what happens when you combine it with Adam. So you can also use this framework to combine it with Adam. So here, what I'm looking at is, so Adam actually has another hyperparameter which people previously have found is quite important to tune. It's this epsilon hyperparameter, which is used for stability. And you can also tune the server learning rate for Fed average. So if you tune both the epsilon and the server learning rate, the best accuracy for Fed average does indeed match MIME. But what is interesting to me is that so in MIME, the best combination of these hyperparameters actually coincide with the setting which you would use in the centralized setting. So MIME Adam seems to work with the same hyperparameters as the centralized Adam, whereas for Fed average, you really need to retune the parameters. So what this again seems to reinforce the intuition that MIME is a much better framework to adapt any centralized algorithm rather than the Fed average framework. So are there any questions so far? So this is all I wanted to say about the algorithm side of things. And next we'll move on to the theory unless there's some questions.
Maybe I would have one quick question. So do you think that actually that using MIME or like some similar techniques might actually recover the centralized accuracy? Because I'm not sure what data set is this, but if it's like Cypher10, this is not the accuracy that you would get for like a centralized setting, right?
Yeah, this is the extended MNIST data set, and this does match the centralized accuracy. But you are right that for so I think I did try this for Cypher 100. And it was not matching the center. It was not matching it after 1,000 rounds, but that's also because 1,000 rounds don't really correspond to the same number of epochs in the centralized accuracy. So maybe if we let it run for 20,000 rounds, which would match the number of usual epochs we run, maybe then it does match. But you are right that MIME is not the end solution. It is better than what was there before, better than Fed average, but I think there is still a lot of work to do. It's still like, I do think there's like much more scope for improvement.
Thank you. Then we have a question from Konstantin. I'll try to unmute him.
Thank you, Samuel. So my question is about the step size for MIME. Is it right that the step size is something like 1 when we plug in 0, for example? the y-axis?
So yeah, so sorry, this is the server step size.
Oh,
the
I see.
client step size is always tuned for all algorithms, because I think that's pretty standard to always tune the client step sizes.
Okay.
So here we're looking at the effect of these other weird hyperparameters like epsilon and all these things. So essentially all I'm saying here is that we don't need to retune the hyperparameters for mine.
Okay, and when we talk about Fed averaging, the server step size is like we get the update from the client and we just take a convex combination essentially.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. So I think there's another question as well. So Samuel, do you want to unmute, or should I just read it out?
I'll unmute.
Hey. Oh, hey, sorry, I'm running from my phone, so I hope you can hear me okay. No, I was just,
sure.
I was curious about the, I would expect the Fed prox here is performing so poorly because of the regularization parameter being large, and therefore it's converging pretty slowly. Is that your intuition as well, or?
So here we tune the regularization parameter. I think so we tune it between 0.1, 1, and 5, and the one which worked the best was 0.1. So maybe if we go even lesser, it would actually match. It would actually it would recover Fed average. But then I guess if we, at least in this setting, it seemed that the regularization was just slowing it down. Hope that answers the question.
Sorry, I was muted again. Yeah, no, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, now let's dive into some theory and try to understand what is maybe going on with this momentum, and can we do some interesting theory here? Okay, so for simplicity, let's start with the server only setting. So there's no local steps, and we're just computing. We're just taking like one gradient step and so on, and that's it. So here, so in this setting, the momentum is you can write it like this, and when you expand it out, as I said before, it is just a convex combination of all the past gradients you've seen. And because it is a convex combination of the past gradients, and they're all independent, all the clients are sampled independently, the variance actually reduces by a lot. So in particular, the variance of M is approximately 1 minus beta times G squared, where the variance of just the standard gradient is G squared. So if beta is say 0.99, then it's 100. The variance of this is 100 times smaller than the variance of that. So if you use momentum, you are reducing the variance by a lot. But this is not free. When you do this, you also introduce some bias. But in the worst case, you can prove that the bias and the momentum exactly balance out the variance you've gained. So you gain some variance, you add some bias, but then these two exactly balance out. So in particular, if we look at this error between the momentum and the full gradient, so this is what we would ideally like to use, this was still G squared. Remember that, so even if we hadn't used momentum, if I just used gradient of Fi at xt, that would still be G squared. So it seems that we haven't really gained anything. But then again, this is really the worst case, and reality is not really often the worst case. So what this proves is that in the worst case, you're still okay, like your error is still G squared, but in reality, you might not be so biased. And in fact, your bias may even be good. So for this is a simple illustration that if your SGD step is oscillating a lot, then if you use momentum, it will stabilize these oscillations. So it might, so the momentum direction might be biased, but this bias may actually be good. And you're also reducing the variance by doing this exponential averaging. So in the worst case, you're the same. In more practical settings, you may be much better. But what can we do about this worst case? So there is something. So there was some recent work which uses these ideas from variance reduction, like Spider or Sarah and so on, where they try explicitly correct for this bias. So this first term here is the usual momentum update. What they add is they add this extra term here, which attempts to debias the momentum term. So if you just rearrange the term, this just becomes like this. So this is the usual stochastic gradient, and then there is this additional term here. So in particular, if just by induction, if you assume your MT is unbiased, so these two have the same expectation, then in expectation, these two become 0, and these two have the same expectation, and so you have the right term. So your MT is unbiased in some sense. So this is a way to debias the momentum term, but the advantage is that the additional term you've added actually is really small. So especially if you think that xt and xt minus 1 are very close to each other, and your fi function is smooth, then this term is, you can bound it by smoothness. So you've added a very small term. So you haven't really increased the variance by a lot, but you've managed to debias the update. And so with this, you can actually prove that it has a much better convergence rate. So you can prove that this has a convergence rate of this form. So contrast with this with SGD, which has a convergence rate of this form. So this has SGD has a worse dependence both on G and on T. So this is really a much faster rate. Okay, so this is all nice with the server only thing, but what can we do up with MIME in particular? So this is still the same setting because MIME uses exactly the same momentum. The momentum is only computed at X at the server parameter. It is still true that if we can expand out the momentum update like this, so this momentum term does indeed have a very small variance. And then when we combine it with the with this update in the client update, so if beta is close to 1, this term is small. So it's mostly all just mostly the momentum term. So the variance of the client update is also small. And so at least you can believe that most of the techniques which argue that the variance, whenever the variance of this is small, it's good. So you can translate the proofs to the federated setting as well. And in fact, you can also extend this to this momentum-based variance reduction with this bias correction, which we talked about before. So just to repeat, the reason why we're able to easily adapt the proof from this from the server only setting to here is that the momentum is fixed. It's only computed at xt, and so this expansion remains the same. And so the variance of this M is quite small, even in MIME setting. So with just this, you can prove that you can prove a rate like this. So with MIME MVR, you recover this nice fast rate of this momentum-based variance reduction, which we saw. And so are we done? Like, we seem to have a nice rate, and we seem to have at least recovered the rate of MVR. But we can actually do better, or we would hope to do better. So so far we have only matched the rates of the centralized algorithm of the server only method. So what we would ideally like to prove is that MIME not only managed to preserve the rates of the centralized methods, but it can also take advantage of the local steps, that it gets a rate which is better than the centralized setting. So how do we go about that? Clearly, the key here is analyzing what local steps are doing. And let's dive into that part. So the main reason why server only updates is so nice is because if we are only computing the gradients at the server parameters x, so if this is our update step, in expectation, this is the full gradient. So this is really an unbiased update. So whenever we are doing server only updates, we have unbiased gradients, and so everything is super nice. But when we compute the but when we take some more than one local step, we're not really computing the update at x anymore. We're computing the update at some yi. So this yi already depends on I. And so when you take an expectation over this, this is not equal to the unbiased update. So this is just mathematically stating our previously stated intuition that when you take more than one step, you're overfitting. And this is just mathematically making that intuition precise, that it's really this bias which is causing all the problem. So, and causes client drift and so on. Sorry for this barrage of equations. I'll walk you through them slowly. So okay, so we know that the main problem is the bias. So it's really this quantity. So we would have ideally like to have an update of the full gradient at yi, but we are stuck with the gradient at fi at yi, and so we want to bound the bias between these two. So how much is this? Let's just add and subtract this term. So this is a term which is nice. We know that in expectation this is unbiased. So we know what to do with this. So let's just add and subtract this. And now when we rearrange, we can rearrange it to be something like this. So gradient of fi minus gradient of f at yi, and the same two things measured at x. Oops, maybe. Okay, so this really, so if I write a function, so this really looks like fi minus f gradient at yi minus fi minus f gradient at x. So it's no surprise that this, when you're talking about difference of the gradients, Hessians enter into the picture, and so you can approximate this by the difference in the Hessian times y minus x. And so because we assume that the Hessians are close to each other by some delta, this bounds the bias by delta times y minus x. So the punchline is that the bias you have in your updates is mainly controlled by two factors. One, how far you've moved. That's quite intuitive. Like the further you are from these server parameters, the more bias you're introducing. And also the difference in the Hessians. So this really is a key quantity which enters the picture here. So in particular, if this difference in the Hessian is small, you can get away with moving very far and your bias will still be small. So the number of steps should be inversely proportional to delta. In fact, it should be proportional to L over delta. So if your delta is very small, you take a lot of local steps and you will actually benefit from them. If your delta is not, if your delta is, in the worst case, as we said, it's equal to L, then you should just take one local step and you can't, that's the best you can do. And so using this, plugging this into our machinery and into our analysis, you can actually replace the L in our rate with a delta. And because delta is always smaller than L, we can prove that MIME MBR is actually faster than this server-only MBR. So we've managed to prove that local steps actually help. And not only help, they help asymptotically. So this is really the first result where which shows that local steps can help asymptotically. But also, this momentum-based reintroduction algorithm is actually optimal for centralized methods. There's some lower bounds which show that you cannot really do better than momentum-based reintroduction for centralized methods. And because MIME MBR is faster than this, it's really faster than all centralized methods. You cannot really hope to obtain this rate by any centralized methods. The only way to get this rate is to do multiple local steps. yeah, so this is what I wanted to say about the theory. Are there any questions?
So there are no questions in the chat, no raised hands, so I guess you can continue.
Perfect. Yeah, so I think this. I just want to say that this idea of bounding the bias in the local updates is actually quite general. I believe that it can be applied to many other algorithms, including perhaps to Fed average. So in our paper, we only analyze MIME with this trick, but there's really a very general way of bounding the bias in updates. And probably has much more wider implications for other algorithms as well. So yeah, so if you're interested in this, in the theory of optimization, I think this is a good thing to look into more. Okay, so some takeaways of this section is that Momentum managed to inject some global information. So it really seems to be doing. It seems to be the reason why Momentum seems to be helping, or at least the reason why we can quantify why Momentum is helping, is because it is reducing the variance by injecting information about the other clients into the current update. It really seems to be ideal to compute the momentum globally at the server level and just apply it during the repeatedly again and again in the client update. So this does have a disadvantage, like Konstantin pointed out, that if we want to do this, we need to communicate the momentum vector to the client. So we are increasing the amount of communication by the server. Yeah, so this is a problem, but it depending on the situation, it may be worth it, it may not, and it's, I think, an interesting question of whether you can replicate the advantages of MIME with much lesser communication. And finally, the usefulness of local steps, of any local steps, not just of MIME, seems to critically depend on this Hessian variance term, and probably warrants more investigation on this. Oh, there's also no known lower bounds. So if the Hessian variance is small, there's no lower bounds which say that this rate. So there are no lower bounds for the federated learning setting which say that if you can take infinite number of local steps, say, what is the optimal rate you can get? So MIME gets this rate by taking some L over delta local steps, but it's not clear if this is actually optimal. There are no lower bounds known. So that's also a really interesting question. Yeah, so I think I have like 5 minutes, so I'll just super quickly just blow through this other setting which I wanted to talk about. So there's this second, there's this really interesting problem which I've been looking at recently, which is called Bicentennial robustness. So it's quite similar to the federated learning setting, except that here a small number of users are malicious. So they're actively trying to derail the convergence of our algorithm. So either they're trying to attack the method, or they're just buggy. Like there's some bug in the hardware, there's some bug in the code, and so they send some weird updates. Can we? And the question is, can we tolerate such Byzantine clients? So a small fraction of clients can send arbitrary updates. We are in the worst case scenario, so we assume that they're omniscient and they can even collude with each other. And the goal is to develop algorithms which are resilient to this. The most popular way to deal with this is, so in federated averaging or in MIME or most of these methods, you take the updates of the client and you just average them. But if you average them, this guy can just send infinity. And so what you'll end up with is you'll just encounter some nonce and you're screwed. most approaches tend to replace this average with a more robust aggregator like coordinate-verse median, crumb, geometric median, centered clipping, and so on. This well and good, but this actually has a problem. So even if we do manage to, so suppose that this is our ideal update in the absence of any Byzantine attacks. With some Byzantine attack, we do successfully defend against it. So we end up with this update, which is really close to our original update. So the error is quite small, and so it's a successful defense. It's a successful algorithm, a successful aggregate. But the issue is when we're running it for many rounds, these error so the attacks can be coupled across time cleverly in such a manner that the error keeps adding up in the same direction. So even if it's small in a single update, what can end up happening is that over time, you can make these accumulate and eventually you can make it diverge. And this is just an experimental demonstration of this. Basically, all of the defenses have a pretty big drop in accuracy, like 20 to 60% drop in accuracy. And the defense here is again, it turns out that just using momentum is actually good enough to defend against this. And here the intuition is exactly the same. So instead of just directly aggregating the updates, use some past history, like average it over the past history. So if you're averaging over past history, the stochasticity of the clients, of the good clients actually averages out. So the stochasticity grows as square root t, whereas these systematic biases which the attackers are trying to introduce will scale as t. So when you average things, the variance reduces by a lot, but the bias doesn't. And so any biased updates stand out a lot. And so they get much easier to filter out. So just replace the stochastic update step with a momentum step. And this actually managed to work really well. So I don't really go into theory here, but I just want to showcase that this intuition of momentum reduces the variance by a lot. And most of the times in practice doesn't really introduce too much bias, leads to some really interesting algorithms. So here we see that we actually recover the center clip with 0.99 momentum actually recovers the full accuracy, the standard accuracy. Yeah, so in conclusion, so trying to understand why some of the tricks which work in deep learning work, even if you just have some intuitive understanding of this, it's possible to port some of this intuition into the federated learning setting and have some gains. And I think there's a lot more work to be done towards this. Thanks.
Thank you, Praneeth, for your excellent talk. So please, if you have a question, either post it to the chat or raise your hand. So I would start with one quick question. So for this Byzantine training, so this algorithm you presented didn't have any local steps. So could you actually extend and use it the same way as with the MIME, and would it still work?
Yeah, I believe it would. So this is just for simplicity. We studied with one local step. I don't really see any difference of the challenge of local steps. So the challenge in this Byzantine setting is not the local steps. It's really the heterogeneity. Even if you just have one step, the heterogeneity is already a problem. So yeah, so I think it should be straightforward to combine these two. But it's true that in our work, we don't study the local step setting.
Thank you.